Hey there, welcome to my channel, and finally we made it. This is going to be the final verdict on the Viwoods AiPaper. We started off with kind of an unboxing and a hardware review, did an update on a visual tour of what the device can do, went into battery results and kind of showed off some good and bad things about the device, and we're just finally ready to wrap it all with a bow. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to go over the pros and cons of the device, both primary and secondary, so we'll talk about that. And then we'll summarize and give my just general feeling of, do I recommend this device, and if so, for who? And then I want to put this a little bit into context of the marketplace. We did some of that in the first video, but I'm going to take a little bit of a different take in this video, so we'll kind of frame it, hopefully, and then we'll wrap things up. So hopefully it was worth the wait. Let's get right into it. So we're going to start with the primary pros of the Viwoods AiPaper. And these are what I would say are the highlights of why someone might want to purchase the device. And we'll start off with the AI integration. There are a number of devices that are released out there that talk about having AI in an app that you can access separately. But Viwoods really has taken this to a different level by having this pretty deep integration with AI within a number of their applications, of course, including their note-taking application, which they call Paper, just as well as having a chatbot at a button press away. There's no other device at this point that does anything like that, and they did a really good job of doing those integrations, particularly around the customizable queries within the notebook, which I talked about in the previous video. In addition to that, it's really light and thin for its 10-inch size, very similar to the hardware specs of the Booksco 10.3. I think it's a little bit better. The screen's a little bit larger. It's slightly lighter, although not in any consequential way. But I just think the form factor is a bit better. And, they just did a great job with the hardware. The note-taking, very remarkable. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But basically, it's a very solid note-taking experience. It's not in the realm of a Books and a Supernote, and again, we'll kind of cover that later on in the video. But it's a very competent note-taking device and very much stacks up well against what Remarkable has done. And then finally, it's also a solid e-reader. Now, there's no front lighting. That's important to point out. But it handles EPUBs really well. It, of course, handles PDFs, and again, I showed that in the previous video. Kind of surprising for its 10-inch size, how well PDFs actually showed up with minimal manipulation. But in addition to that, you've got the Amazon Kindle app, you have the Kobo app, you've got Barnes & Noble, you've got Libby. Just a great selection of reading options, and the screen, as crisp and with a great contrast, just makes it a really nice e-reader if you've got a well-lit environment to read in. Okay, but what are some of the reasons why you might not want to purchase this device? And first off, yes, I do like how well PDFs show up on the device, but let's not get confused. This is nowhere near the more sophisticated PDF readers. The reflow options, well, I don't recall any, actually. And just the amount of things that you can do on a Books device, for example, this is nowhere near that. So anyone really focused on PDFs, I think there's other devices that do it better. It's competent enough, but if that's your main use case, you probably wouldn't be looking to this device. There's no cloud storage of notes. So their Viwoods transfer app is literally just an application to help move files either to the device or from the device. It's a really nice application, but it's not cloud storage of your notes. So unlike Remarkable, which does have a very robust kind of cloud storage, has a desktop app that's associated with that, there's nothing like that with Viwoods. So all your files do reside on the device, and you have to use this transfer app to manually back those up. So that's something to be aware of. And a lot of competitors have cloud services. Remarkable, Books, Supernote all have some cloud services where you can store your files. Viwoods does not. And then finally, and I've mentioned this a little bit in the pros, this is not a note-taking application that would challenge anyone focusing on a Supernote or a books device. Those devices have a lot more features, particularly around reference and search, but other features as well that really distinguish them from a Remarkable or a Viwoods. So if you are looking toward the more complicated note-taking applications and you're okay with the learning curve around those, then you're probably not going to be considering the Viwoods, because it does really reside more in the realm of where Remarkable resides, which is a little bit less on the features in order to have a more easy to interact with experience. So that's definitely something. If you're looking for those more details, you're just not looking to Viwoods. Okay, so now we move into secondary pros and cons. And these aren't things I necessarily would think most people would use to make a purchasing decision, but they are distinguishing features I wanted to highlight both for and against the device. So we're going to start off with the decent battery life, and you can see all the details of the battery results in the previous video, but it handled itself fairly well, never being best in class, but generally being in the upper half of most of the things measured, so it has pretty good battery life. The end cap eraser is something I don't normally use on Styli. I do prefer an area eraser, but this actually was much more usable than I'm used to with those types of erasers, and I was pretty impressed with it. I could easily, just without any settings changes, go in and erase what I wanted to fairly quickly. Again, not as good as an area eraser, but surprisingly effective compared to my past experiences. The hardware is really well made, definitely one of the strengths of this device, so wanted to call that out. There is ghosting on the device. I don't want to give any illusions that there isn't, but I think it's really well done. It's very subtle. I rarely found myself wanting to refresh the screen. Sometimes you do, and then you just swipe down the bar and press the refresh button. So there are 2 swipes associated with that. But I didn't find it particularly cumbersome. And I do think, in general, this device handles ghosting better than the Books Go 10.3. So that's a little reference point. The fact that nibs are stored in the case is kind of a cute little touch. I should point out, however, the extraction tool is not stored in the case. So you do need to be able to pry it out with something, with a thin shaft or something like that, much like you'd use in replacing a SIM card. But nevertheless, to be mobile and have some tips there handy in the case is pretty cool, and I really appreciate that kind of innovative touch. The voice and handwriting recognition, very similar to when I tested the Viwoods Mini, is solid, it's right on. So it's important to have that, particularly with the AI features, and it handles that quite well. I referenced this earlier, but their Viwoods transfer app is great. Moving files on the device is super easy. I just use my web browser on my computer, and any file that I have on my computer, I can pretty quickly load. It's all fairly seamless. Moving files from the device to the transfer app is pretty easy as well, and you can move whole folders or individual files, and it's all pretty well done, so I'm pretty impressed with it. So not cloud storage, but it does have this nice transfer application. And then finally, of course, the 300 ppi screen, which is starting to become ubiquitous. We're not quite there yet. We are seeing more and more devices with 300 ppi, but it's still worth calling out, and this device has that. Okay, so now we're going to wrap up with the secondary cons of the device, and we'll start off with the fact that you can log into the Kobo app if you have a username and a password with Kobo, but if you're logging in through Google, it's not possible. I kept running into a blank screen, so I did want to call that out. The device only functions in portrait mode. There's no landscape, and you can't turn the device around. I did get a comment from one of the viewers asking if left-handed folks could use the device, meaning that things that were normally on one side would move to the other, and they don't. So that's another thing to call out. There's nothing unlike Remarkable where you can switch from right to left-handed on this device. The eraser button and the end cap are only for stroke erasing. As I mentioned, I do like the end cap eraser. I really would have liked to have seen the button be more of a lasso tool, and that's currently not the case, nor is there any toggles to make that the case, so that is a limitation. This is something that was different in my experience versus the Mini. The haptic buttons on the bottom oftentimes were a little bit sluggish and didn't necessarily register my touches. Now, I reached out to Viwoods about this, and apparently what they're trying to do is make sure they're preventing accidental touches. But as I mentioned, on the Mini, I didn't have this issue at all, and I never touched it by accident. Granted, this device has a larger screen, so I guess the chances of hitting that accidentally are greater, but I really wish the haptic buttons were a little more sensitive than they were. When you create a text box in the Paper app, it's really weird. It's very hard to move it around and resize it. So I found that particularly annoying, and I wanted to call that out. The app selection, of course, is very limited. There's only, I can't remember, 20-something apps on the device. It does have, of course, the apps that are curated for the device, reading apps, and a few utility apps. But it's certainly nothing that you'd experience on a Big Me or a Books device where you have access to the entire Google Play Store, so that's definitely worth calling out. When they do updates on the device, at least thus far, there have been no change logs on the device, so you don't know what that update necessarily entails. So hopefully that's a change that they'll make in some point in the future. I mentioned earlier there's no front lighting, so just note that here. No speakers and no apps that have any audio functionality, like there's no Spotify, for example. Presumably you could use the Chrome browser to watch YouTube videos or what have you, but you'd have to listen to it through Bluetooth, earphones or speakers, because there's no speaker. And again, no video app. Not all the AI is well implemented, and I've gone into great detail about this. In fact, a lot of it is a little superfluous. I think overall this is okay, because they have it working well where it needs to work well, but it has to be noted that there's definitely a lot of stock AI functionality that doesn't really add a lot of value. And then the last thing I'll mention, and I talked about this and I showed this in my previous video, there is this pen stroke issue where when you start initially writing, you write for a little bit and then one of your strokes, or sometimes even two of them, there's a delay in writing that out. And it's a little bit jarring, and you definitely notice it. Once you get past that and you continue writing, it's a non-issue. One viewer noted this is probably something that could easily be fixed with a software update, and I agree. And I did alert Viwoods about this issue, and they said that they would work on it on a future update, although there's no ETA around that. But for now, this certainly is there, and it's something that you notice. Okay, so now that we've gone over the pros and cons of the device, just what do I think about it overall? Do I recommend it? And if so, for whom? Well, first off, I think the device is an excellent note-taking device. It's really solid at what it does, matches Remarkable pound for pound in terms of features, even adds its own, for example, with shape perfection. So they did a really good job with this device. In addition to that, there's just a lot of touches of innovation. Just to kind of name three, of course, the AI integration comes first to mind. The fact that you have the tips in the case is kind of this neat little touch. And even something as simple as having a quick note where you can make it transparent so you can see what's on the screen behind the note is a really neat little feature. Are you going to use it that often? I don't know. But it's just little touches like that, which I really appreciated with this device. So, is it perfect? No, there's definitely room for improvement. For example, the calendar app to me is pretty pithy. It doesn't have any integration, for example, with Outlook or Google, so that does limit its functionality. I think there's an opportunity, to make pickings a little bit better. So right now, a lot of your annotations just end up being stored as individual screenshots, so one-page screenshots. It'd be great to have a digest that allows you to collect those into one document. There is kind of a way around that, but it involves creating a pickings document and attaching images to each page. There could be a more seamless way of handling that. And of course, as we talked about, the PDF functionality is fairly skimpy. There's some opportunities there. But even with all those opportunities, I just think the device does a lot of things really well. And I'm not bothered by the things that it doesn't do. They're just opportunities to be better going forward. So I keep mentioning Remarkable, and I do think of this device as, frankly, as a Remarkable Plus. Now, there's a couple caveats to that. Of course, as I mentioned, in the pros and cons, Remarkable has cloud storage really well done. That doesn't exist at all with the Viwoods. And we also noted how there's no left-handed mode for the Viwoods as there is with Remarkable. So if you were looking to the Remarkable 2, and either of those features were things that you were definitely interested in, then Viwoods is probably not going to be a good alternative for you. But if those particular issues aren't a factor at all, and you were looking at the Remarkable 2, you should get the Viwoods AiPaper instead. I definitely recommend it for those circumstances. In addition to that, generally speaking, I also recommend it for anyone, kind of doing more of creative writing or thinking, writing to help their thinking. I think this device is perfect for that, either with or without the AI features. It just does a great job. I love the screen size. It's only slightly larger than most 10.3 devices, but you notice it. And they've structured that paper app so well, so you really feel like you've got a lot of canvas to work with. So I'm really impressed by that. So yeah, in those particular areas, I do recommend the device. Okay, so now that we've done a full review of the device, I'm going to return back to kind of how it fits in the marketplace. And we'll start off with this graphic, which I've used in past videos, that is kind of my taxonomy of the e-ink note-taking space. And it basically breaks everything down into 3 groups. You've got your Kindle and Kobo, which is more, it's all about the reading, and the writing is there kind of to supplement that. You've got your writing first, reading second devices like a Remarkable, now a Viwoods, and also the Supernote, where really that note-taking app is the core, and you've got reading as well, but it's, secondary to the writing. And then of course you've got your devices that allow you to use Google Play. Those are quite distinct. And I do like this taxonomy. I do think it's accurate, but I'm not quite sure it does a great job in explaining the competitive dynamics. I really don't think Supernote, for example, competes against Remarkable, nor does it compete against Viwoods. And I know this from my own personal experience. I have a Supernote, and the use case I use it for, I would not use the Viwoods or Remarkable for. And what I'm using the Viwoods for, I don't necessarily need the Supernote and what it can do. So I don't really think that's the competitive dynamic. So having that in mind, I kind of tweaked this graphic, and I came up with this, which I do think more accurately reflects where the actual competition's happening in the marketplace. So the Kindle and Kobo dynamic remains untouched, of course. That's pretty solid. But what I've done is I've extracted books and I've extracted Supernote from their respective groupings. Kind of talked about why I pulled Supernote out already, but talking about books, MobiScribe and BigMe are trying to compete against books, but really books is competing on a very different plane. And I think people considering a books device are more likely to consider Supernote and vice versa than they are the other alternatives from the groupings from which they came. So for me, this feels like a more natural fit to how the marketplace is really working. And of course, you end up with Viwoods pitted up against Remarkable, and that's not a coincidence. I think Viwoods very intentionally position their device that way. Now let's forget about Viwoods for a second and just focus on Remarkable versus books and Supernote. Why do I separate these out? Well, the main reason, it just comes down to the complexity of the note-taking application. The Remarkable is less complex, and the Supernote and books devices are much more complex. Now, I do want to point out that Supernote and books have 2 very different philosophies about how they do their note-taking application. Books has more features per square inch than any other device out there. And the Supernote has a lot of features, a lot of key features, but a little more curated, a little more focused on flow. So they have different philosophies, but what they share is this idea of just having a lot of features that you can leverage, where Remarkable caters to a very different group of people in the marketplace, people who still want a powerful note-taking app, but they want to strip it down, decrease that learning curve, and just focus on the writing. So that's really a big reason, in addition to marketing and brand recognition, of why Remarkable is where it is. But it's also the trap that Remarkable has found itself in. Many people have noted that Remarkable doesn't have a lot of updates during the course of the year. And when they do have updates, they're kind of skimpy and they're very marginal, if you will. Not that they're bad updates necessarily, but they're not adding a ton of features to the device. And I think that's very strategic on Remarkable's part. Remarkable does not want to move towards Supernote and books. It's very intentional not to do that because they want to hold on to their marketplace. They have a bigger market than Supernote and books. And if they start adding complexity, they just move their product in more direct competition with those other two manufacturers. Meaning two things. Number one, they would basically start to highlight the fact that there's these other companies out there that are more attractive alternatives as the Remarkable becomes more complex. And in addition to that, Remarkable's worried about alienating their core user base. So in a lot of ways, I think what we see in these updates is this recognition by Remarkable that they want to show some development and some progress, but they're very keen on not doing too much. And that's, I think, a source of frustration for a lot of people about Remarkable that want to see certain features added, and it's not happening because of those dynamics I just outlined. Well, let's bring Viwoods back into the mix now. What's so exciting to me about Viwoods is, first off, they were smart in building their product to go after the Remarkable market. It's just the bigger of the two that we just compared. So it makes a lot of sense that they're doing that. But they know they can't just compete against Remarkable one-to-one. Remarkable will destroy them every time. They have the brand recognition, they have the market penetration, and Viwoods is a new player to the market. So Viwoods, and this is going back to my phrase Remarkable Plus, is trying to take a product very much like Remarkable and adding features. So we've seen the addition of some apps, we've seen the addition of that shape perfections, we've seen the addition of some of the other features that have been reviewed in my review series. In addition to that, there's a chance that Viwoods will continue to develop their product and do what we've wanted Remarkable to do this whole time, but Remarkable is reluctant because of those market dynamics that I just went over. So that's what's exciting about Viwoods. Viwoods is what I had hoped Remarkable would be, but couldn't. And they need to do that in order to differentiate themselves. So it's really interesting to see what they do with this device going forwards. So I'm definitely impressed with what they've done so far. I think it's an amazing product. And it's worthy for consideration, but I'm also interested in it and the company itself in terms of how they're bringing innovation to this space that has been fairly stale. And I'm not referring to books or Supernote, I'm referring to the Remarkable side of the marketplace. So that's my kind of take on the Viwoods company and how this product fits in and why it's exciting to see this company move into this space and bring some sense of innovation. I thought I'd close with a few postscript notes, starting off with, am I going to be using this device going forwards? I review a lot of devices, and I only use some of them on a regular basis. Most of the devices I use, or review rather, go into a drawer not to be touched again. That's where the Remarkable Paper Pro is sitting, that's where the Books Go 10.3 is sitting, and so on. Going into that drawer doesn't mean it's a bad device. I've recommended some of those devices or in certain situations. It's just you can only do so much. So for me, the Supernote A5X remains my daily driver. This device isn't going to touch that. It probably will be replaced by the A5X2, and then I'll be doing a review on that when that comes out. But that's definitely my daily driver. My go-to e-reader, I'm using the Viwoods Mini right now, but I'm probably going to end up going back to the Bigme S6 Color Plus just because of the color, and it has, the same apps. The Viwoods Mini is lighter, so it's kind of nice to use it from that perspective, but I kind of miss the color. So I'll probably end up going back to the Bigme device at some point. And then in terms of my desktop, I rely on the Books Note Air 3C, particularly for making videos. The fact they have access to Microsoft apps like Word and PowerPoint, both of which I've used during the course of this video with my notes and my PowerPoint that I shared earlier. is something, and of course with this origami case, which I have here sitting in front of me, it's just perfect for my videos. There's really nothing that can replace that currently. So all those devices are in my stable. Now normally I'd like to cap out at about 3 devices ultimately, but the Viwoods to me is super interesting. I do like it better as a kind of a note-taking and device than the Note Air 3C. That's not a slam on the Note Air 3C. I just don't necessarily need the color, and I do like the lighter screen in my darker environment here in my study. So I kind of like the idea of Viwoods, and I don't want to put it in the drawer because I think there's a lot of innovation that might be coming down the pike. I don't know that for sure, but based on what I've seen so far, I'm pretty optimistic about that. So I think I'm going to add a 4th device, believe it or not, to my rotation, and this will be kind of my desktop device where I'm doing my to-do lists for the weekend, and then any type of kind of general thinking, paper replacement. If I'm playing a board game and I'm using, I need paper, I would use my Viwoods instead of, whatever the paper is. It could be Yahtzee, or it could be a complicated D&D game, whatever. I'll be using the Viwoods in the foreseeable future. So that's kind of how it fits in with my flow. I can't believe I'm saying this, but looks like I'm going to have a rotation of 4 devices that I'll be using on a regular basis. Anyway, just wanted to give that as some context. And finally, I do have, depending on when you watch this video, I do have a discount code for the Viwoods AiPaper. You can get $50 off until November 5th of 2024. And the code is in the description. Also, be aware that you can purchase the device at Amazon. It is a little more expensive on Amazon, however, versus if you just buy it, even without a code, on the Viwoods site. So just be aware of that. But it is available, at least in the US market. Okay, that's going to do it. This ends our review series. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please put them in there. I'll respond to most of them. And I'm looking forward to that. And until then, I will see you next time.